Hello there and welcome to tiebreak action from the World Cup in Sochi. Now we're going to look at Andrey Esipenko against Magnus Carlsen. The first two classical games were drawn and the first two 25 and 10 games were drawn as well. We see that Esipenko has a rating of 26-28. That's his rapid rating. His classical rating is over 2700. Meanwhile, Magnus has a slightly higher rating in rapid. He's very strong in rapid. In fact, he won the first 10-10 game, so Esipenko needs to even up the score. Let's see how he goes about that. He plays e4 on the first move, and we have e5. Now, in this match, Magnus has been sticking to e5 and playing the Italian. We've been getting this slow Italian, gioco pianissimo. And not much to say about these moves. These moves are fairly standard. Usually they come in some order or the other, and some mini plans may vary, but not much to say about these moves really. Knight b to d2, knight e7. This knight usually goes to g6, and quite often copies with his knight, goes to f1 and g3. In this case, Esipenko goes for space on the queen side with a4. Breaks in the center, d4. The knight goes to g6 as planned. Bishop back to f1. Usually we see this bishop kind of linger and hover around here, but very often the bishop is fine here in many openings. Kind of keeps an eye on the king side if needed, and also it's luring. It can come back if needed somewhere on the queen side. So a good square, a different kind of look. We're avoiding trades on e6, etc. Queen c2, bishop c7, and this had indeed been played before in the game Sudler against So in Paris in June, last month. There, Sudler took on e5, but Esipenko's move b4 is a novelty, and probably Magnus doesn't handle it in the best way. He probably has to keep the tension around here at rook b1, logical move, trying to line up on the b file. Probably has to meet the pressure with rook b8. He releases the tension, takes on b5, but this gives white good prospects on the b file. The rook moves and not d5, closing down this bishop and then retreating. And Magnus played rook a to b8. It looks very risky to take this pawn. First of all, you'd have to evaluate if I just take and then take here. You take this and then things start to drop off either here or here. But probably a move like queen a2 might be strong as well, and simply threatening rook c1. And this does not look like a good situation for black. The queen has to retreat, rook c1, knight c4. And I think material will start to drop. So Magnus does not fancy the pawn, and he plays rook a to b8. Then knight c4 comes on the board. Pressure on this and this, so you have to play bishop c5. And this bishop we gladly take. And we control the b5. The b file. If you take with the pawn, I will simply line up here on the b file with a wonderful knight. I can even flick in, take it on a5, and then come back, and then just eat up this pawn eventually. So queen takes, rook b6 nonetheless, and things are getting very difficult here for Magnus. He has to defend, knight to e8. And simple plan for white here, just increasing the pressure. Magnus tries to hold on, but more pressure on the pawn. And now more pressure on this pawn, and eventually something has to give way here, and it's the d6 pawn. So the pressure has netted white an extra pawn, and very often at this level that's enough for a win. So the rook was pinned, so we defend the rook. Rook b3 was also an option to defend the queen, then move the other rook. Esipenko prefers to unpin the queen, queen a3, keeping an eye on this pawn of course. And then some tactics here, bishop b5, trading away this bishop because there are a lot of weak squares here, light squares, especially this one. where we want to put a knight. So a light square trade is in our favor, especially if we can take with the rook. If we have to take with a pawn, things are maybe a little bit hairy because the rooks don't have a lot of squares, and maybe queen c7 or queen c5, and the rooks are simply almost trapped. But we have this in-between move, rook e6, taking the queen, and then we can take with the rook. Very important. Keeping the pressure on the b file. If you have to take with the a pawn, things are not as clear. But rook b5, keeps the pressure, and you're probably going to net another pawn. Now Magnus doesn't take on c3, and there's a good tactical reason why he can't do that, and we'll actually look at that later, because as things transpired, queen e1, knight f7, Esipenko took on a5, and now for some reason Magnus took on c3. And I don't think viewers of my channel need too much time here to figure out what's wrong with this. If you do check out the video called The Queen Sweep, a tactical pattern. Important tactical pattern, and unbelievably both players missed it. Magnus by blundering and Esipenko by not seeing it. Esipenko took on c3. But you're right. The simple rook e8 wins. You can't take because the queen sweep. We sweep away the defender of the queen, and if the king moves, then we sweep in the other direction and take the rook. There's no back rank issues. The king is safe. So I don't know how, why, or when this was missed at this level, but they both missed it. So queen takes c3. Fortunately for Esipenko, he's still up the pawn, and he has everything under control. Pressure here. He's about to take the 7th. This knight is coming into the game. This is probably lost for Magnus. Here comes the knight. Here comes the rook. Here we have a trade, and now we simply secure the pawn. Black didn't really have time to take it because otherwise the pieces would, the white pieces would have flooded the black position. But now the pieces just come into excellent squares. The pressure remains, and white can more or less improve the position, at his leisure. So Magnus decides to give up a pawn here, try to get some activity for his rook, gives up another pawn, but it's too much. And Esipenko pushes his passed pawn at the king f7. True, we're threatening to win the pawn, but a nice trick here, which very often wins simply a rook. Let's say the white pawn was on c7 and the rook was here, and now you take, check, wins the rook. In this case it's a trade, but still a very important tactic because the pawn ending is easily winning for white after g5. And well, black can resign here, but they play it on, king f5, king g4, the king is coming into f5. Magnus went for counterplay, but it's simply too little too late. We do get the a pawn, and it looks like we're almost queening at the same time, but Magnus resigned, and the reason is quite simple. It's true that we're going to queen after white queens, but there's a big problem, and the problem is so big that we might even be a boss and promote to a rook to demonstrate, because we can simply give a check here and then win the queen. Of course we would promote to a queen, but just showing you the underlying tactic. But still unbelievable that both players missed this very, very standard and easy tactic. And do check out the video if this is not in your arsenal. It should be, and well, at least you learned something today. So see you in the next one. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.